Older writer, though, for a festival like this, because there are people who argue with some evidence that social media have taken the place of imaginative literature, and that people are now creating their own narratives on Facebook and with Twitter and Instagram, Snap, and all that make it unnecessary to sit down and write an extensive work of prose. We shall see if this is true or not. And in the meantime, you are now looking at someone who goes back to an earlier era of writing. We had no MFA programs back then. We had the famous Writers' School of Westport, Connecticut, which advertised in magazines. Bennett Cerf was on the faculty, Faith Baldwin and a few, Rod Serling were on there. And they advertised on matchbook covers as well. And you knew if you paid that money that you were going to be read not by the famous writers themselves, but you were going to be read by graduate students. And they would say nice things about your work. You were going to shell out money in order to be praised. To what purpose? And so we knew it was a scam, and we did not go for it. We wrote our work on manual typewriters, and so as you wrote your first draft, you had a sinking feeling that you would have to retype this entire thing. You did not have the capability of moving paragraphs around in an easy, fluid way. You had to rewrite the whole damn thing 3 and 4 and 5 times, which took a great deal of patience. My generation of writers believed that the truest sign of talent was to be self-destructive. And so we worked hard at it. And we forced ourselves to chain smoke unfiltered cigarettes. And we forced ourselves to drink whiskey, drink bourbon, a writer's drink. I don't know where we got the idea, but there was a precedent for it. Dylan Thomas, Faulkner, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Thomas Wolfe, they were all alcoholic, famously alcoholic. And so we tried to emulate them. We drank and smoked ourselves into a stupor, which made us even less able to write anything that was sensible at all. You young people have been spared all of that. And I just mention that so that you know how truly fortunate you are. There may be no imaginative literature in another 5 or 10 years. And it may be the case that nobody will pay you to write a novel. Everybody will expect to get it for free. But at least you don't have to chain smoke. And you don't have to drink yourself and make yourself stupid. It has been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon this last week. I had a wonderful, productive day. Sunday. I don't go to my Episcopal church anymore because they got a new rector who thinks that he is the MC of a variety show. And as the MC of a variety show, I don't see it that way. I'm taking a vacation from the worship of the Lord, and I'm working instead. And I made some good progress Sunday and Monday on a novel that I'm working on about a stand-up comedian, and also on a memoir. This memoir is very interesting. My motivation is that I learned that a woman signed a contract with a publisher to write a biography of me, and I wish her well, but I would like to get my own version out there too. And she's talking to an ex-wife and some ex-girlfriends and disgruntled employees. So I wanted to write the story of my own life, and the amazing thing is that once I started in, I discovered that I had a really happy childhood, which I had not known before. Back in the day, you needed to have a tragic childhood in order to be a serious writer. And I discovered that I had not had that. I grew up a fundamentalist. I grew up among people who were living in daily expectation of the rapture and the tribulation that would follow, Armageddon and so forth, and the fall of Babylon. And we lived and breathed prophecy. We lived with some concern, about whether we were saved or not, whether we were really saved or not. And because, we believed that God had decided all of that before the world was made, and what did God know about us that we didn't realize? We weren't sure. I grew up among these gentle people and discovered in writing my memoir that I'd been happy and extremely lucky, and that was a good thing to find out. Monday night, my wife Jenny and I lay in bed, and we were talking about the young couple who have moved into our third floor, and a young woman who is extremely pregnant and who is 2 weeks away from delivering a child, and what a blessing this would be. And from this conversation, lying there in the dark, I could feel my wife roll towards me, which is our long-standing signal. And so we made love. We made love to mature people who grew up in repressive homes, which you discover at this stage in life only heightens the pleasure of being naked with another person, even after 20 years of marriage. We made love. It was a lovely, lovely, lovely thing, and lay there sort of stupefied by pleasure afterward. I woke up on Tuesday morning in chaos and confusion. I was in the emergency room of United Hospital, and there were bright lights, and people were asking me who I was and if I knew where I was. And I discovered that I had had a brain seizure, which terrified my wife. And she had called 911. And so the firemen came and they hauled me down the hill to the hospital. I was muttering gibberish. It made no sense at all, and I was sort of stiff and terribly confused. But I came around. I think they gave me Ativan, and I came around, and in order to prove that I had my faculties, I recited for them the 87 counties of Minnesota, which we were required to memorize in the 5th grade. And this really impressed them. They'd never come across this in the emergency room. But I recited Aiken, Anoka, Becker, Beltrami, Benton, Big Stone, Blue Earth, Brown, Carlton, Carver, Cass, Chippewa, Chisago, Clay, Clearwater, Cook, Cottonwood, Crowing, Dakota, Dutch, Douglas, Faribault, Fillmore, Freeborn, Goodhue, Grant, Hennepin, Houston, Hubbard, Isantia, Itasca, Jackson, Kennebec, Canada, Ojai, Kitson, Coochie, Lackaparra, Lake, Lake of the Woods, Le Sueur, Lincoln, Lyon, McLeod, Monoman, Marshall, Martin, Meeker, Mille Lacs, Morrison, Mauer, Murray, Nobles, Norman, Olmsted, Ottertail, Bennington, Pine, Pipestone, Pope, Ramsey, Red Lake, Redwood, Renville, Rice Rock, Roseau, St. Louis, Scott, Sherman, Sibley, Stearns, Stevens, Swift, Traverse, Wabasha, Wadena, Waseca, Watonwan, Wilkin, Winona, Wright, Yellow Medicine. And so they sent me up, admitted me to the hospital. And I lay up there and, was visited by a neurologist who had some ideas about why this had happened, and a cardiologist, and bearers of bad news, and I lay up there thinking about death, of course, as one would in that situation, and wondering what I would be remembered for. I put in a lot of work on creating a saga of a small town in which I discovered, after I've been doing it for about 10, 12 years, I was recreating the lives of my parents. My parents, against whom I was obliged to rebel, of course, over the people of our town, and almost collided with a hot air balloon, which was coming in for reasons nobody could figure out. I guess just because I needed it for the story. They might remember bits and pieces of it, but the saga of Lake Wobegon was a piece of archaeology, and I doubted I would be remembered for it. I believed that I would probably more likely be remembered for short poems, which are easy to remember. A liberal lady of D.C. By day was tasteful and PC, and then after 10 she went out with men who were vulgar, rednecks, and greasy. When it comes to the masculine species, she said, believe me, I'm easy. But liberal guys tend to theologize, and I am not St. Clair of Assisi. It's possible, you see, in writing a limerick to create something which is perfect. This is not possible in prose fiction. It's absolutely not possible in improvised storytelling on the radio. Everything you do is very clumsy and hit and miss. But you can write a perfect limerick on the name Syracuse. There was an old singer of Syracuse who was startled to hear his old dear accuse him of rushing and slurring and thereby obscuring the words that the writers of a lyric use. It's perfect. And nobody else will ever write a better limerick on the word Syracuse. I've written it. It's done. You see, and it's the only one that exists. I could quote others, but I mean, there it is. It's a monumental piece of work. What good does it accomplish? I don't know. I don't know. There was a young couple named Kelly who were found lying belly to belly because in their haste they used library paste instead of petroleum jelly. Thing that a person would be remembered for by 10 and 12-year-old boys, which is where immortality is. What you write that some boy is going to look up in a school library years from now and admire. I used to do avant-garde dance with a blowtorch, blue paint, and no pants, which some people guessed was genius and the rest left quickly when given the chance. That was a sobering thought, you know, I was lying in a hospital and thinking that having been an English major, having written really stunning term papers on the Miller's Tale, Canterbury Tales, having explicated the Transcendentalists, having gotten an A on a paper on Emily Dickinson, that this would be your future after you die. That was a sobering thought. I thought about this sonnet that I had written. I have an obligation to write sonnets because I am an English major and I am able to do it. An electrical engineer would have to work awfully hard to do this, and I don't think he would be happy with the results, and nobody would pay him any money for it. I lie down at night with this cold, dumb dread of death's dark estate, and that is why I don't mind you kicking me in bed. Not at all. I'd rather be kicked than die. It must be so boring to lie down dead after the long, gloopy memorial goodbye and contemplate what you wish you'd said for your last words. No, I prefer to lie spooned with you until I'm 90 or 95, still crazy about you, and say goodnight one night and dream I am saved by grace, and then dive swan-like into a spacious tunnel of celestial light. Out with the old and in with the shining new. Hello, Jesus, goodbye. Oh, my darling, my marvelous you. The beauty of writing sonnets is that it's a classic form, and so one simply needs to make one's imagination live within 14 lines of iambic pentameter with a certain rhyme scheme. This is a challenge worthy of an English major. We don't write for self-expression. We start out doing that, and then we discover that we are no more interesting than most other people. So we have to find another strategy. And the strategy is to take the ordinary events of our lives and put them into a classic form, which I did for my wife after we had splurged on a very high hotel room in Manhattan years and years ago. Up in the sky, the lovers lay in bed, naked, face to face and hip to thigh, her leg between his arm beneath her head, their hands roaming freely up in the sky. In the dark, Manhattan lay at their feet, a blanket of glittering stars thrown down. Beyond her bare shoulder, 59th Street, and from her lovely ankle, the buses headed uptown. They came to the city for romance, as people do, and with each other they scaled the heights, and now united they lie at rest, these two, the bed gently rocking in the sea of lights. Where will they go? What happens next, I do not know. I am that man waiting at the bus stop far below. Shift in identity in the last line is something I tossed in for English majors. Purely for effect. I love, absolutely love sonnets, to take ordinary things and put them into a form that Shakespeare would recognize. To me, is a worthy way to spend an afternoon. You made crusty bread rolls filled with chunks of brie and minced garlic drizzled with olive oil, and baked them until the brie was bubbly, and we ate them lovingly, our legs coiled together under the table, and salmon with dill, and lemon and whole wheat couscous, baked with garlic and fresh ginger, and a hill of green beans and carrots, roasted with honey and tofu. It was beautiful, the candles, the linen, the silver, the sun shining down on our street. Me with my hand on your leg, you, my lover, in your jeans and green t-shirts and beautiful bare feet. How simple life is. We buy a fish, we are fed, we sit close to each other, we talk, and then we go to bed. You too, huh? So that's what I decided lying in the hospital. That's what I would be known for. I got out of the hospital, they let me out on Wednesday, late afternoon, and they'd given me a prescription for an anti-seizure medication, and I started taking it, and I felt a terrible vacancy. I have never had that feeling before, not even back in my drinking days. It was fearful. I had to write a show, and I worked hard working on it. I wanted to write a story of Ulysses, the Odyssey, and so I tried to do that. And I had to go do a show on Saturday, and I had this terrible, terrible feeling I have never, ever had doing a radio show before. This feeling of indifference. And my cousin, the doctor, said it was that medication. That was a side effect, is a kind of passivity. I stood up there on a stage on Fitzgerald Theater in front of 1,400 people and with, I don't know, a few million people listening. And I felt an utter indifference, which terrified me. You just can't do a show feeling that way. It was horrible. I did a sort of story, like Wobegon. I had been writing my memoir early in the week, and I sort of snatched some parts of it, and I invented a story about my grandfather seeing signs of the rapture. He had seen 3 words from a chapter in the prophet Hosea on 3 successive billboards on Highway 7. 7 being the number of perfection in Scripture, and the words were, "Lo, he cometh," and so he thought the rapture was about to occur, and he went over to my Uncle Earl's house, and Earl had gotten out his television set, which he usually kept hidden in a closet, and he was watching the Minnesota-Wisconsin football game, and he was very excited, and he didn't see Grandpa coming in through the door, and because Grandpa disapproved of television because they showed movies, and movies meant Hollywood, and that meant drinking and adultery, and so there he had the TV in front of him, and he was excited because Minnesota was on the Wisconsin 20-yard line with 2 feet to go for a first down, and he was yelling at them to go for it, as Grandpa came in, and he just saw Earl standing in front of the TV, and so there was a glow around him, and he thought this was the rapture, and that Earl was being raptured, and not he, and Grandpa tackled him from behind so that he would be raptured along with Earl, and then he saw it was just a television. It struck me as I was making up this story that this was not the best monologue I'd ever told in my life. But I stood out on the street afterward and shook hands with a few hundred people, which is my duty, and they all seemed to think it was a wonderful show. When people congratulate you for something that you think is inferior, it awakens powerful feelings of guilt that go back to your childhood. All this in a week when you were remembering your happy childhood. So that was my week. I'm going to tell you so I don't have to tell anybody else. Don't intend to write this up, make a story out of it. I'm 73, I wrote on Monday. I still am. I live in St. Paul on a limestone bluff above the Mississippi, about 20 miles downstream from Anoka, where I was born, in a white frame house, not so different from the one I grew up in along the river north of Minneapolis. The Gospel Hall of the Plymouth Brethren is across the river, about 8 miles away, where I attended the Sunday morning breaking of bread and the evening gospel meeting and Wednesday night Bible reading. The university I attended on the banks of the river is west of here, where I majored in English, which instilled standards in me I will never achieve, a boulder I will never push to the top of the hill. It's a small life, and when I fly away from it to Rome or Copenhagen or London, I find myself trying to reconstruct the storefronts along Main Street in Anoka, 1955, Carl's Cafe and Shattuck's Soda Fountain, and Diedrich's Department Store and Colburn Hilliard Men's Store, and recover a summer day at Uncle Jim's farm when I was 6, and I fell through a hole in the haymow and banged my head on a wooden feed trough in the bull's pen below, and was carried into the house, and Grandma put wet brown paper on my head that had medicinal value. And to reward me for my bravery, I did not cry. Uncle Jim hoisted me up and set me on his big workhorse, Prince, who was hitched up with Scout to the hay rack. And I clung to Prince's mane and collar as he jogged along a dirt lane through an open gate to the hayfield, where Jim threw forkfuls of mown hay onto the rack, and back to the barn we went. I searched this memory looking for my parents, and they're not there. Only Grandma, who is whistling under her breath as she bakes bread in a wood stove. A Model T sits in the farmyard, Grandma's chickens pecking the gravel around it, and my cousins and I sit in the back seat, and we are singing, "Go tell Grandma, go tell Grandma, go tell Grandma, the old gray goose is dead," and tears run down our cheeks. 60 years later, I can recall exactly which brethren sat where on Sunday morning in the meeting hall for the breaking of bread. My parents and we 6 children sat in the southeast corner of the room, and Grandpa Denham and Aunt Margaret and cousins Roger and Shirley and Aunt Ina sit ahead of me, and Uncle Don and Aunt Elsie sit in the northeast, and in the middle of the room a small table with a loaf of bread and a pitcher of wine, the body and blood of our Lord, sun streaming in the big windows, motes of dust glittering, and after a long silence, waiting for the Spirit to move, my father stands up and he prays, which amazes me. He is shy about praying in public. He is a carpenter, and he feels inadequate to address God in public, but he does it. His sense of inadequacy was inherited by me, and it may be the engine that kept me going all these years. I sustained a weekly radio show for 4 decades that began as a lark and became a success, and I can't recall a single time when I felt accomplished and proud. Not a single moment. I walked around with a microphone and confided fictitious secrets to people I didn't know. I, who have less interest in performance than the average 13-year-old girl, but you get conditioned to it. And once you meet a few faithful listeners, there seems to be some dignity and purpose in it. But after every show, every one, I felt shame It was so much less than what I wanted it to be. I have prayed in public very few times, and each time I felt sort of proud of myself. We were an odd family. We were definitely odd. We were wary of strangers. A knock on the door was ominous. Family might knock, but then they would open and walk in. Strangers stood at the door, and we did not invite them in or make pleasant small talk. We asked them what they wanted, and we dealt with them out there, and then we sent them away. We were not in the market for friendship. We had no friends. We had family and fellow believers, brethren, except for a few who drifted away, and we didn't talk about them. Strangers were not brethren. They were of the world, and so their friendship was not important to us. We were not out for success or prosperity. To achieve that, you had to hide your faith and accept worldly ways. Listen to blasphemy and not speak up. Accept vanity, strive for glamour or travel. We had no need to make ourselves beautiful. We are beautiful in God's sight, and that is more than sufficient. We are devoted to the Word, the beautiful King James, and we interpret it for ourselves with no clergy to push us around. And we accept its literal truth, the parting of the Red Sea, the miracle, the resurrection, all of it. My parents avoided frozen or canned food that wasn't frozen or canned by us. It was shameful to pay for something you could do for yourself. They felt honor-bound not to pay outlandish prices for things. They did not feel sheepish about this. Overpaying was a shameful thing. As Christians, they expected to be translated to scenes of unspeakable glory at God's right hand. And in the meantime, Mother patched our clothes and darned our socks. She collected our old cast-off clothing and tore it into strips and knotted them into rugs. In August, we picked bushels of tomatoes from our garden, scorched and peeled them, boiled them in a pressure cooker to make 60 or 70 quarts of stewed tomatoes. Sunday dinner was pot roast and gravy and vegetables from the garden, either fresh or canned. If company were present, we held back and let them have seconds first. We never took the last helping of anything, but we subdivided it endlessly, a slab of pie reduced by halving to a sliver. Mother sat at one end of the table, Dad at the other. He said the blessing, and it was always exactly the same, word for word. Laughter at the dinner table was rare. Brethren were serious people. Personal charm was suspect, something for insurance salesmen and politicians. On Sunday morning, you sat in meeting among women in dark print dresses and men in dark suits. Their faces looked as if carved from wood. And you sang from the little flock hymnal, mournful dirges to the risen Christ, with no musical accompaniment, because Scripture mentioned no piano or organ, and you lived not by fashion or your own opinion, but by the Word of God. And we came home to the smell of pot roast simmering in the oven. The Sunday paper was open, the comics spread out on the living room floor, potatoes put on to boil, and Mother made gravy. I lay on my belly in my Sunday clothes, reading Dick Tracy and Little Iodine and Maggie and Jiggs and Gasoline Alley, and Mother and my sister made dinner. If there was company for dinner, Don and Elsie or Ina and Louie, the men sat in the living room and talked about cars. They were well grounded in mechanics, having grown up with the Model T, and they prided themselves on having